And we are live, our final session at the Open Ed conference with Virtually Connecting. We'll start with the on-site folks, and then we'll introduce the virtual people who are here tonight.
Okay, hi, I'm Karen Cangelosi from Keene State College, one of the panelists for the How to Destroy the Open Education Movement session.
I'm Jameson Miller, an OER research fellow, GoGN proud member, Global OER Graduate Network, and also at Lumen Learning.
I am Scott Robison from Portland State University, also involved with this session. I think that's...
Ken, are you going to jump in and say hi?
Ken, you going to jump in and say hi? Or?
I'll just say hi, and they asked me to go over about some
He's going to do some other thing
on OER. So thanks, everyone, for joining Virtually Connecting. It's been an awesome week.
So thanks, Ken. And why don't we go with Christina and Jenny, and then Michael and...
Oh. Okay. Hi, I'm Christina Hendricks. I'm at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, BC, Canada.
And hi, I hope you can hear me. I'm Jenny Heyman. I work for eCampus Ontario, and I am coming to you live from my house in Guelph, Ontario tonight.
Nice.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Jameson. Hi, everybody.
And Michael and Sally.
Hi, I'm Michael Berman. I'm at Cal State Channel Islands in Camarillo, California, about 60 miles northwest of the conference.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Sally Piwairangi. I'm at the University, Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand.
Great.
Cool.
Great.
And I'm Helen Dward. I teach with the Faculty of Education here in Central Ontario. So teaching new teachers how to craft the lessons and working in the open. So tell us about this session you just finished and how it wraps up the whole tone of the conference.
Anybody want to start, or you want me to? I think we had a really awesome session. It was almost an hour. It seemed like it just flew by in 30 seconds. I want to say again how Scott's great technical skills helped to bridge the people that were actually on site present in the room with the 20 or more participants that were online via a Zoom session. And he helped facilitate taking those 20 from a big group into breakout rooms back and forth like 3 or 4 times, which we mirrored on site where we had our participants. We asked a question, they got to think about it, they got to talk about it, they went into groups, and then they came back and forth. And then all of that information, share back, got typed into a Google Doc. I know Robin DeRosa was helping to type things into this massive Google document that's just got a rich array of stuff. And the questions that were asked, the first question was, how do we ensure that open education is not open? And so people had a chance to think about that. And then the second question, what's the second question, guys, here? Oh, yeah. What things are we doing that resembles in any way that list that we just created? And then the third question was about what we can do. How are we going to stop doing these things in the future? What are our first steps? So those were the questions that were considered. And there was a lot of lively discussion and a lot of capturing of stuff on this Google document. I think the hope is to eventually kind of get it compiled in some way, get it out there so other people can still give feedback. It can keep being this living, dynamic, breathing document, to have ongoing discussion, not trying to create some finished product. Now we're done with this. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
I'll just say something quickly. So they were on site and I was online. And so was Tara Robertson was online. She's also in Vancouver, but she couldn't join us here. So we were on the Zoom, they were in person, and we were all trying to do the same thing. So we had Tara was facilitating some of the on-site discussion from virtual, and then Gill was facilitating from on-site, including both the virtual and the on-site. So we were trying to really mix the two in a way that I've never seen done before, and it was very interesting. I'm sure it was a completely different experience in person than it was virtually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you guys hear what was going on in the room, or?
Most of it. If it was in the back of the room, we couldn't hear, but otherwise we could. But it was a lot of, okay, we got to mute those people so we could talk. Okay, who's not got their mic muted? And we broke out into great breakout rooms and trying to discuss quickly, because then we had to come back quickly. It was a bit confusing.
Yeah.
I think the people in the room, were the face-to-face people were quite happy, like, or at least pleased to see, like, wow, look at this screen with 20 faces on it.
Yeah, that was
neat. They're all kind of here and all can have a voice in this conversation, even if it's somewhat disjointed or cumbersome. I think it was kind of impressive. I mean, I saw people like going, huh, wow.
Yeah.
So,
and Ken took some pictures of all this, so we're going to be able to share that out later too. So that was great.
I think it really, with a few more tests and a few more tweaks and some practice, I think like what Christina said is like it could be a little bit more of a merged experience, as opposed to, oh, those are the remote people, and we're the on-site people, and never the two should intermingle. But I think it's almost, we're getting to the point where the technology is good enough that we can have, though it's not the same, we can have more of a merged experience, which I think is pretty interesting.
And Tara did a good job from remote in actually facilitating and talking about the questions that people both on site and online were going to be discussing. So having remote facilitation of an on-site event was pretty cool.
That was key.
Yeah, I think that's what bridged the spaces, was having Tara lead there in the beginning.
Yep.
And emphasize too that the previous session ended just 5 minutes before we got everyone organized, and the room quickly became crowded. But I did feel like the general feeling in the room was, one of cooperation. Everyone was helping move the chairs around, getting things set, and it did seem natural just to have that projected screen up at the front with 20 more people.
Mm-hmm.
So in any way, did the process mirror the topic?
Well, yeah, I think that was kind of the point. Like, what are we doing to break the open movement? And one of those things is not allowing people to participate, like a closed environment. So this conference is fairly closed. So one of the things we wanted to do in an intentional way is open the room, like open the session and invite people to interact. And so, I think some ways that was part of the point of doing this.
Right, and there may have been, I don't know for sure, but there could have been online participants that weren't at the conference, not because they couldn't or didn't have time, but actually actively chose not to come to this conference for different kinds of reasons that may have to do with the conference itself. And so this way they could have a say in what was going on and what we were talking about, and still sort of enact that stance of saying, this is not a conference I wanted to align myself with. So I think that aspect of it was pretty cool.
If I could, we have a newcomer, an interloper here to the side, of participants in our session.
Oh, hi guys, it's Nate again.
Hi, Nate.
I think they've seen me too much today.
Okay.
We were hanging out earlier.
Yeah.
Good.
Cool. One thing that
So one big takeaway from the, how are you going to break the open movement?
Good question.
We have a very long list.
We have a billion ideas that were generated and put into this document, and I don't know. I'm going to throw that back at Christina.
I tweeted out the Google Doc in case anybody. It's on the OpenEd17 hashtag. You can see how gigantic it is. So we haven't had time to. I think it was just 15 minutes ago. So we haven't had time to synthesize it. Yeah.
I'm sure there's something that jumped out that you went, ooh, that's the nugget I took.
That's a good question. I think because we were so involved in the technical aspects of it, Jameson, I don't know if you have there's a lot of different kinds of things. One of the things that I think was a tension within this whole idea of destroying the open ed movement is that there are those of us that are worried about it becoming too commercialized and too taken over by venture capitalists. And on the other hand, there are people, how are we going to make this sustainable? If you guys shut down the conversation and make our granting agencies go away, then we're going to have nothing. So some people said we can destroy it by alienating all the funders. And other people said, no, we can destroy it by being sellouts and just having only that kind of funding actually, support what we're doing. So that, I think that tension came out pretty clearly in what was shared and in the document too. It's such a diversity of ideas here.
Yeah. And one that stuck out to me was one way we can destroy the open ed movement is by alienating newcomers. By either saying like they don't get it or rolling our eyes or moving our conversations always to these further levels without bringing everyone along. That was a good one.
Yeah, in any way limiting diversity of voice.
Yeah.
And I was curious that someone actually brought up as one of the ways to destroy the open ed movement was promote like just the dominance of Creative Commons licenses.
I thought that was kind of interesting too. Yeah.
They said over-reliance.
The over-reliance on CC licenses.
I didn't understand it either.
Yeah.
As opposed to some other license or no license at all.
Or just
Which is
relying too
copyright.
much.
There was something in an earlier session about, I don't necessarily think we need to have our students put CC licenses on everything they do. And so I'm not sure whether that's around what we're thinking has to happen. And if you're open, then you don't have to do anything, so.
I could see the concern about forcing people to use a specific Creative Commons license, which came up also.
Right.
But it was a little different than over-reliance on them, which I was also puzzled by that. We need that person to say more, I think.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. And some people that were much newer to the idea and people that have been involved in the movement for a much longer time may have had different takes on everything as well.
I did notice that the groups that formed in the room, it didn't look like there was any clots of only people who knew each other. Like it seemed pretty well mixed. And
yeah.
I know my little group was pretty well mixed with new personalities.
How did you engage or how did you figure out who was coming virtually into the room? How did you?
They were treated as another group in the room, so
they signed up ahead of time, though.
Through Christina's.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think we could have done a better job on, and that was partly me. We couldn't figure out how to get people to sign up exactly. We needed people to sign up ahead of time. Although today we actually just tweeted out the link, so anybody could have joined through the link. But so I wrote a blog post, and then I kept tweeting it and asked other people to tweet it, and so it was still like a closed. If you were in our circles, you saw about it. You saw it, right? But if you weren't, you didn't. I did put it on the hashtag, but I'm sure there are better ways. A wider, yeah.
An idea came up. I was confused because Scott was logged in as Portland State University. I thought a whole room full of students and faculty at Portland State were tuned in. That's amazing, Scott. How did you organize that?
Should have just had your name.
An idea. Would be to convene
Groups
rooms of people in other places,
Yeah.
rather than just single people in other places.
All right. It's a good idea.
Nice job, Scott, doing that.
Sure.
I have a question, if I may. Were there any students involved? Or did you have virtual students involved in this?
I don't know. There were some graduate students that were in the room. There aren't that many students at the conference itself. There was a really amazing all-student panel in the very opening of the conference, like right after the keynote. The first thing was this student panel that was really, really amazing. But as far as this session, not any students that I was aware of. So we could have done a better job of trying to. So students look. So the questions about the open ed movement would require maybe students that know a little bit more about what the open ed movement is.
I was wondering if there were any suggestions that came out for engaging people wanting to become involved in the movement, but unfamiliar with the discussions and how things are moving.
Yes, that did come up. So as Karen went over those questions, the session worked its way through these 3 levels, right? So, how would you destroy it? And what identifying and admitting to how we are doing some of those activities. And then at the end, we come to some of these resolutions or some of these ideas about coming back. And one of those was to have what did they call it? A session for not for newbies.
Asking the stupid question.
Yeah, ask all your stupid questions kind of session. Mm-hmm. We did have at the conference this year 4 newcomers, like the day before the conference, the evening before the conference, newcomers could come. And David Wiley did do a session to walk people through what was going on and some of the basics. And he said he had about 60 people there. So I think that's already an improvement, but we thought, well, what about something within the conference where you could come and ask that? And it could be part of that unconference area as well. That was the one idea that I caught from what we talked about how to engage those newcomers.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question for you. It may be hard to answer at a public forum, but here goes anyway. I'm interested in the relationship between Open Ed, the movement, and Open Ed, the conference, and the extent to which you think that's working now or not.
Well, I think that there's been a lot of discussion about that. There's been discussion on Twitter prior to the conference. There have been discussions that I know have happened between different groups of people. We actually had a pretty interesting roundtable discussion yesterday where the topic was about critical conversations. And there were key people at our table, including David Wiley, Robin DeRosa, I think Jameson was there. There were a number of other people involved in this discussion about what is the Open Education Conference, who owns it, how is it organized, how is it funded, and how might that be problematic in some ways, and what are possible models for the future? How could we maybe have a more inclusive process? All this talk about diversity and inclusion that we had earlier, like how could we perhaps do something like create a board of directors that's elected, that have limited terms, that we create a constitution of a sort, that we're very explicit about our mission, that there's a collaborative process of people that could be involved in that. Like those were just some ideas. Like if we were to move to a model like that, that would be pretty different from what we have right now. I think that a lot of people felt in favor of that. I think even David himself was kind of considering, he seemed very open to trying to think about the evolution of what's going on, even though he's nervous about entering into a future that may not be a place of comfort, and wants to make sure that the open movement doesn't, just kind of die because nobody's kind of taking it under their wing. But I thought those were very encouraging conversations that happened yesterday. I think today's session was a little bit all over the map, so that we didn't get to that as specifically as we did yesterday. So does that answer your question?
Somewhat. I mean, does anyone else have anything to add? I mean, this aspect of it. I mean, part of it too, I'm thinking about, based on both the other session I saw briefly earlier, and also the discussion about how to bring along newer people, is how to expand, thinking beyond the conference, and not necessarily changing the conference itself, but what has to happen outside the conference, or what are mechanisms or strategies that would keep the conversation going and broaden it in ways that bring people in that are not going to be at a conference, even not even virtually, perhaps.
Yeah, I think one idea that I found promising that came up not just in our session, but several times throughout the conference, is trying to engage with discussions about open education and OER at other conferences, at our other disciplinary conferences, or even at the American Education Research Association conference, There's a call out to there's a petition out to get a special interest group in those organizations. So kind of broadening, instead of just coalescing open ed around this conference, trying to disseminate the conversations and research and projects and engagements into other conference circuits is one dimension of diversifying, which I think makes a hell of a lot of sense.
Yeah, I heard that in the form of Mark McBride from SUNY proposing that we no longer have open ed as a single conference and instead disband into tracks in every other important conference, so that we kind of disseminate and infiltrate.
And then everyone said, no, we still want to get together.
Each other.
But if we had a more of a diverse organization that was composed of a larger number of people with different kinds of ideas, that let's do this regional thing, or let's put this product out there. So I think the idea of having some kind of an organization that a lot of people would have to be involved in shaping, that just doing the conference may be not the only thing that they would do. And if there was a conference, it might look really different too.
Mm-hmm.
This might be a nice connect to conversation next week with Wayne McIntosh, OERU conversation.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the part we're not really engaging with at Open Ed, and that, you know, what Mike's just asking about the conference versus the movement is we're considering the movement as it manifests here in North America,
right.
And it is not, I mean, and Jenny knows well that this, you know, as we've both been engaged with the international community beyond US and Canada, there's other dimensions and other priorities, and the global north-south divide came up in our session.
Quite a bit.
Engage with that.
Mm-hmm.
And the global east-west.
Yes, exactly.
One thing that's a little bit different about this movement, and I use the word lightly, than some other things I've been involved with, is there isn't a single organization behind it, right? So it's like Michael knows and so forth. I mean, you take something like, you know, Apereo as a educational technology umbrella organization could be the organization that has a board of directors and bylaws and, you know, membership and things like that. And like, who would do that? Would we say, would Creative Commons do that? Where would we locate that sort of responsibility and authority?
Mm-hmm. And I think it doesn't necessarily have to be located in any one particular place. Like a lot of academic organizations just have different people that are interested in it, that get together, that are, you know, put their names forward as a possible board of director person or an executive officer, and other people vote on it. So, I mean, you need like maybe a mailing address, or this person's doing this piece, but there doesn't have to be a institutional ownership beyond the organization itself. Structurally, that can happen, and it does happen in other societies. So like maybe a North American organization, and that there's a lot of talk with European and other global organizations.
I'm just wondering, oh, sorry. I was just, you know, going to throw it out there as to whether we're trying to impose a structure on something that might work best without a structure, in terms of involving different people and breaking down the barriers.
So are you saying not have a structure at all?
Well, not trying to impose it, but allow it to evolve and incorporate or engage as many different people as possible without worrying about who's organizing it or who's in charge.
I guess if you don't have events, that may work differently. I don't know.
Or certainly, I mean, somebody right now takes responsibility to make sure that the conference actually happens. I just know from experience, there's a whole raft of logistics that get taken care of, that it's not that it wouldn't be possible in a completely, what would be the right word? Anarchic.
Organic.
Organic. I like that better. Organic. It sounds a little positive. Organic format, but I mean, it would take some real commitment from the organic participants participants.
But I think it did. I can't remember if I recall this explicitly in the space, but there has, with that idea with the board, there is the lament of like, okay, well, with this hierarchy that comes in, even if it is elected, there is power relations that show up when you have a board of directors, and this is problematic as well. So I think I sympathize, Sally, with that idea that, we should be very mindful about those kinds of changes that come about. There's certainly pitfalls and to any of those approaches.
Helen knows, and Christina's probably seen some, and Ken definitely has been involved in this. Even with our little virtually connecting collective, these issues keep coming up, and finding things that, well, if we had a board and we were a nonprofit, we could accept donations and so forth. I know that I've been a voice for not doing that, just because I'm also on a board of directors for something else, and I know
Me too.
how much the governance, how much work the governance and the finance and so forth consumes that you can't spend on whatever it is that you want to do. But the practical result is that one or two people, especially Mehabali, ends up doing all the work,
Right.
because there is no structure, and so nothing happens, and so she ends up rushing in and doing it. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like family dinner, and there's usually always one woman who makes it happen, and that's kind of what virtually connecting has been. But it's grown tremendously fast in the last 2 years, and there's demands to do more and more, and so the sort of non-structured structure is really creaking under it. It weighs heavily on certain people who end up doing a lot and maybe not getting that much credit for it. So it's a real tough balancing act. You're talking about a worldwide movement, so it's like on a whole other scale.
Yeah.
That's why.
Well, I feel like there's OE. What about OE Consortium? there is kind of a global organization that is nonprofit and has its own board. And
I'm sure they have a board and a staff, and they spend a lot of money, and I'm not criticizing them at all for it. You can't not do that. If you got to pay people for the work, and now you have employees, and you have all the issues of being an employer, and you have to buy insurance, and you have to pay lawyers, and I mean, all that comes along with it. At some point, there's not really good alternative, unfortunately.
And the OE Consortium organizes the OE Global conferences, is that?
Yep. Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
I suppose if those conferences are in different locations, you can have an OE Global in Canada or in the US, and then in different countries. So then,
and they have member institutions, right? That's one of their conceits is you can be a member of OE Global. You pay a membership fee. It's not enormous, but it is something. And that's how it keeps itself going. It's a nonprofit. It has connections in many, many countries. It's kind of a good candidate for a global picture.
Yeah, and so the question is, do we need a North American organization? Maybe we should just all be part of the global.
I don't see why not. Yeah. And then have regional conferences that.
I'd so much rather join an existing organization rather than create like we don't want the overhead of a whole new organization.
All right, so here's an idea. Who's interested in maybe doing a "How do we destroy the open education movement" session at the OE Global 2018 in Delft?
I'd be interested. I'll see if we can get there.
Yeah, that's right.
We need virtual.
We're gonna try.
We need virtual facilitators.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll participate via virtually connecting. Yeah.
And we can do breakout rooms in Zoom.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we did with this one. So
Got good practice now.
yeah, I'll follow up with that. I'll blog about this and talk to the other group, and I'll get that out to everyone. And we can. I think we have until the 24th to get.
23rd.
23rd.
Yes.
The 23rd to destroy open education.
How to do it in a week.
But I also think this idea of if we just had OE Global, then what does happen with David Wiley and open education here? Do we say just kind of subsume yourself into that, or just go away?
You can still be involved. It doesn't mean you can't be.
Well, I mean, I want to say something controversial because I couldn't participate in it earlier, and I know it's controversial. But I love David's work. I love it so much. He's so dedicated, and he has put in so many years and yeoman service into the open education movement. But I feel like it's time for him to step aside a little bit and let us hear some new voices, and for him to promote some new voices in
Yeah.
leadership. I love David, but when I saw he was the keynote for OER 18, I was really shocked.
Yeah. But I was
Totally
sort
agree.
of, yeah, I think a lot of us are feeling that way, but I also feel like he is like coming to that. Like I felt very encouraged by the discussion yesterday, and you can kind of even see the sort of agonizing in his face that he like knows that he has to. He talked about jumping, he's moving towards the end of a diving board that he has to jump off, and he has a lot of fear around that. So I think like, instead of saying, you need to get out, like ways to support him around how this movement, and I don't know what that looks like or what, but
yeah, and not for a moment would I want him to stop doing the work that he's doing, innovation that he's doing. Like that is not the point. It's it is the domination of the conversation that is not healthy, right?
Totally with you, sister.
Yeah,
100%.
and honestly, I don't think that he means to do it. It's just that everyone looks to him as, you know, the father of the open movement, and it's become a little bit
too much, yeah,
outmoded, I think, at the moment.
It might free him up to do other good work.
Yeah,
absolutely. Have to run this thing he has, and let others. Then he'll have time to do his other bits.
Yeah, let's just be a regional chunk of OE Global or OE Consortium or whatever it's called.
A board seat.
Yeah.
Or not. Give him a year off. So.
Awesome. I'm very conscious of the time. I know you are the late people at the conference. We can continue conversations, but I was just thinking maybe we can stop the broadcast and continue an after party.
Okay, that sounds good, and we'll probably get going soon too.